welcome to DCF Investigations. There are shadows in the history of American crime that are so deep and so impenetrable that even the brightest lights of justice fail to illuminate them. We often look back at the 1930s as a time of romanticized gangsters, bootleggers, and the hard-boiled lawmen who pursued them. But while the nation was fixated on the organized violence of Al Capone and the bank robberies of John Dillinger, a different kind of darkness was festering in the industrial heartland of Ohio. This was not a crime of greed or profit or territory. It was a crime of pure, unadulterated madness. It was a sequence of atrocities so grotesque that it broke the spirit of the most famous lawman in America and left a city paralyzed by fear. Tonight, we descend into the murky, smoke-choked ravines of Cleveland, Ohio, to uncover the story of the Cleveland torso murderer, also known as the Mad Butcher of Kingsbury Run. To understand the horror of these crimes, one must first understand the stage upon which they were set. In the 1930s, Cleveland was a city of stark, brutal contrasts. It was an industrial titan, a place where steel mills and factories belched smoke into the sky 24 hours a day, turning the noon sun into a dull, copper coin. The Great Depression had ravaged the country, and nowhere was this more visible than in the area known as the Flats and the sprawling shantytown known as Kingsbury Run. This was a dry ravine that cut through the city like an open wound, filled with refuse, industrial waste, and the makeshift homes of the desperate. Thousands of homeless men and women, known then as hobos or transients, lived in cardboard shacks and rusted-out train cars. They were the forgotten people, the invisible population of a struggling nation. And it was here, among the transient and the downtrodden, that a predator decided to hunt. The geography of Kingsbury Run is essential to the narrative. It was a labyrinth of railroad tracks, weeds, and pollution, a place where a body could be discarded and not found for weeks, if ever. It was a place where people disappeared daily, hopping freight trains to find work in other cities, meaning a missing person report was rarely filed. The killer understood this environment perfectly. He used the transient nature of the population as a cloak, picking victims who would not be immediately missed, and disposing of them in a landscape that was already treated as a garbage dump by the rest of society. While the official timeline of the torso murders typically begins in 1935, the true horror may have started a year earlier. On September 5, 1934, a young man walking along the chaotic shores of Euclid Beach made a gruesome discovery. He found the lower half of a woman's torso, severed at the knees and the waist, washed up on the sand. The rest of the body was never found. The coroner noted that the skin had been treated with a chemical preservative, perhaps lime or a bleaching agent, turning it a reddish, leather-like color. Because her head was never recovered, she was never identified. She became known only as the Lady of the Lake. At the time, authorities did not link this to a serial predator. It was seen as an isolated, tragic event. But looking back, the Lady of the Lake bears all the terrifying signatures of what was to come. The nightmare officially descended on Cleveland on September 23, 1935. Two young boys, expecting nothing more than a shortcut through the brush of an area known as Jackass Hill within Kingsbury Run, stumbled upon a sight that would strip away their innocence forever. At the bottom of a steep embankment, they saw what looked like a pile of clothes. Upon closer inspection, they realized they were looking at two headless, emasculated male bodies. The police arrived to find a scene of calculated brutality. The first victim was identified as Edward Andraschi, a 28-year-old man who drifted on the fringes of Cleveland's nightlife. Andraschi was known to frequent the roaring gambling dens and speakeasies, often clashing with local toughs. He had a history of minor arrests and was rumored to be involved in the illicit trade of the time. His body was drained of blood, a detail that would become a haunting signature of the killer. The clean decapitation suggested a sharp, heavy blade and a frightening amount of strength. Lying nearby was the second victim, a man who would never be identified. He was listed simply as John Doe 1. Unlike Andraschi, whose body had been there for only 2 or 3 days, John Doe 1 had been dead for weeks. His skin was treated with a chemical preservative, similar to the Lady of the Lake, and his body was older, suggesting he had been killed long before Andraschi, perhaps kept somewhere, and then dumped simultaneously. This detail terrified the investigators. It implied that the killer had a lair, a private place where he could store and treat bodies without fear of discovery. It suggested patience, planning, and a complete lack of fear. The duality of the discovery was baffling. Why dump a fresh body next to an old one? Was it a message? A taunt? The police were bewildered. Coroner Samuel Gerber, a man who would spend the next decade chasing this phantom, noted the precision of the cuts. These were not the jagged, frantic hacks of a maniac in a frenzy. These were dissected with anatomical knowledge. The heads were removed with a single, clean stroke through the neck vertebrae. The killer knew exactly where to cut to separate the head with minimal resistance. This led to the early and persistent theory that the butcher was a doctor, a surgeon, or perhaps a skilled butcher. As the city reeled from the double homicide, the winter of 1936 brought a new wave of terror. On January 26th, a butcher shop owner barely noticed a basket sitting near the rear of his building on East 20th Street. When the weather turned and a dog began barking incessantly at the basket, the contents were revealed. Inside were the dismembered remains of a woman. She was identified as Florence Polillo, a waitress and barmaid who lived in the boarding houses of the area. Like the others, she had been decapitated. Her head was never found. Florence Polillo was a woman who lived a hard life, struggling with the economic despair of the times. Her murder brought the reality of the danger home to the women of Cleveland. No longer was this a threat only to the transient men of the hobo jungles. The killer was striking within the city limits, targeting women, targeting the vulnerable. The police interrogation of those who knew her revealed little. She had left her boarding house a few days prior and simply vanished. The lack of a head made the investigation incredibly difficult. But fingerprints confirmed her identity. Then came June 5th, 1936. 2 young boys were walking through the Kingsbury Run area when they found the headless body of a man wrapped in his own clothing. This victim became known as the Tattooed Man, and he remains one of the most frustrating enigmas of the entire case. The victim was a walking canvas, his skin covered in distinct, identifiable tattoos. He had the names of family members, flags, and symbols inked across his body. Authorities were certain he would be identified immediately. They released sketches and descriptions of the tattoos to newspapers nationwide. Thousands of people viewed the body at the morgue. Yet, incredibly, no one ever claimed him. The tattooed man's autopsy revealed that he had been killed swiftly, his head removed while he was still alive. The savagery was escalating. The killer was not just disposing of bodies, he was inflicting pain. The decapitation was precise, again suggesting a heavy blade, like a machete or a butcher's cleaver. The fact that such a distinctive-looking man could vanish from the face of the earth without anyone coming forward spoke volumes about the transient nature of the population during the Great Depression. People moved, families fractured, and men disappeared into the ether of the road. Just a month later, in July 1936, another victim was found. This time, the body was discovered in the woods of Brooklyn, a suburb of Cleveland. The man, known as John Doe 3, had been decapitated, and his head was found nearby wrapped in bloody clothing. This was the first time the killer had left the head with the body, almost as if he were getting careless or perhaps more brazen. But despite having the face, the victim was so badly decomposed that identification was impossible. The relentless heat of the summer had done the killer's work for him, erasing the victim's identity as effectively as a blade. It was around this time that the city of Cleveland turned to its savior. Eliot Ness, the man who had brought down Al Capone, had been hired as the safety director of Cleveland. He was young, charismatic, and incorruptible. He had cleaned up the police force, fired corrupt officers, and raided gambling dens. The public believed that if anyone could stop the Mad Butcher, it was Eliot Ness. But the torso killer would prove to be a different kind of adversary than the gangsters of Chicago. Capone was a businessman of crime. He wanted money and power. The torso killer wanted nothing but death. Ness was accustomed to fighting enemies he could understand, enemies who had motives. Here, he was fighting a phantom who struck without rhyme or reason, leaving no clues, no witnesses, and no trace. Ness initially tried to downplay the serial nature of the crimes, hoping to avoid mass panic. But as the body count rose, the media frenzy became impossible to contain. The newspapers dubbed the killer the Mad Butcher, and the headlines screamed for justice. Ness organized massive raids on the shantytowns. He sent teams of detectives disguised as hobos into Kingsbury Run to listen for rumors, to watch for suspicious behavior. But the killer was a ghost. He moved through the shadows of the run as if he were a part of the landscape itself. In September 1936, the killer struck again. A homeless man stumbled over the upper half of a torso in a drainage ditch. A search of the area revealed the lower half and the legs nearby. But the head was gone. The victim, John Doe 4, was never identified. The pattern was becoming a ritual. The decapitation, the draining of blood, the washing of the body. Coroner Gerber began to build a profile. He suggested the killer was likely a large, strong man, possibly with a history of mental illness, who lived in or near the Kingsbury Run area. He theorized the killer had a vehicle to transport bodies, or perhaps a house close enough to the tracks that he could carry them. The terror continued into 1937. In February, the upper half of a woman's torso was found washed up on the shores of Lake Erie at Euclid Beach, the same location as the Lady of the Lake 3 years prior. This victim, Jane Doe 5, was never identified. 3 months later, in June, a young African-American woman named Rose Wallace disappeared. Parts of her remains were found beneath the Lorraine Carnegie Bridge. She is the only victim of the later series to be tentatively identified, though even her identification was a matter of controversy. with her dental records providing the only tenuous link. The summer of 1937 brought the horror to Eliot Ness's doorstep. In July, the decapitated body of a man was found floating in the Cuyahoga River. Then, in a move that felt like a direct personal challenge, portions of a human body were discovered in a burlap sack, practically within sight of Eliot Ness's office window. The killer was mocking him. He was showing the famous Untouchable that he could kill whenever he wanted, wherever he wanted, and there was nothing the police could do about it. This brazen act shook Ness to his core. He began to take the investigation personally, obsessing over the details, driving the streets of Cleveland late at night, searching for a monster he couldn't see. The pressure on the police led to desperate measures. They arrested a man named Frank Dolezal, a bricklayer who had once lived with Florence Polillo. Dolezal was a simple man, and under hours of intense, physically abusive interrogation, he confessed to the murders. He provided details that seemed to match the crime scenes. But once the confession was made public, cracks began to appear. Dolezal claimed he had fought with the victims, but the autopsies showed no signs of struggle before the swift, precise kills. He later recanted, claiming the police had beaten the confession out of him until he was willing to say anything to stop the pain. Before he could be brought to trial, Frank Dolezal was found dead in his jail cell. The official ruling was suicide by hanging, but an autopsy revealed he had 6 broken ribs, injuries that had occurred while he was in police custody. With Dolezal dead, many in the public believed the killer had been caught. But those close to the investigation, including Ness, knew the truth. Dolezal was a scapegoat. The real butcher was still out there. As 1938 dawned, the killers seemed to be accelerating. In April, a woman's lower leg was found. In August, the bodies of a woman and a man were found in a dump site near the lake. The woman, Jane Doe 9, had been dismembered. The man, John Doe 10, was decapitated. This double discovery mirrored the very first finding of Andrashi and John Doe 1. The killer was completing a circle. It was at this point that Eliot Ness made his most controversial decision. Frustrated, exhausted, and running out of options, he ordered a massive raid on Kingsbury Run. In the early morning hours of August 18, 1938, dozens of police officers and firemen descended on the shantytowns. They evicted hundreds of homeless people, arresting anyone who couldn't account for their whereabouts. Then, on Ness's orders, they set fire to the shacks. The towering inferno consumed the hobo jungles, burning the wooden crates and cardboard homes to the ground. Ness believed that by destroying the killer's hunting ground, he could stop the murders. The raid was a public relations disaster. The press accused Ness of attacking the victims rather than the criminal. He had displaced the city's most vulnerable population, destroying what little shelter they had. However, in a strange twist of fate, the official canonical murders stopped after the burning of the run. Whether the killer was scared off, moved away, or was perhaps among those displaced, the spree in Cleveland seemed to end. But the investigation did not stop. Behind closed doors, Eliot Ness and Coroner Gerber were zeroing in on a prime suspect, a man whose name was kept out of the papers for years, Dr. Francis Sweeney. Francis Sweeney was not a transient. He was a doctor, a surgeon who had served in World War I in a medical unit that conducted field amputations. He had the anatomical knowledge, the skill, and the strength. But more disturbingly, he came from a powerful family. He was the first cousin of Congressman Martin L. Sweeney, a relentless political rival of Eliot Ness. Dr. Sweeney was a troubled man. He was an alcoholic, prone to violent rages, and his physical description matched the profile. He had access to a laboratory and was known to wander the city in a drunken stupor. Ness brought Sweeney in for questioning. Unlike the brutal interrogation of Dolezal, this was a psychological chess match. They placed Sweeney in a hotel room in downtown Cleveland for days. Ness interrogated him personally. According to reports, Ness looked Sweeney in the eye and said, "I think you killed those people." Sweeney, reportedly smiling with an arrogant calmness, replied, "Prove it." They subjected Sweeney to a polygraph test, a relatively new technology at the time. The expert administering the test told Ness that he had never seen a reaction like it. When asked about the murders, Sweeney's physiological responses spiked off the charts. The expert told Ness, "You have your man." But they had a problem. There was no physical evidence linking Sweeney to the bodies. No bloody clothes, no murder weapon, no eyewitnesses. And with his political connections, arresting him without airtight proof would have been political suicide for Ness. Sweeney eventually checked himself into a veterans hospital, likely to avoid prosecution and deal with his alcoholism. From the safety of the asylum, he began to taunt Ness. For years, Eliot Ness received postcards. They were rambling, mocking notes, often referencing the murders and Ness's inability to solve them. They were signed the Nemesis, or simply with initials. Ness never went public with these cards, but they haunted him until his dying day. Sweeney died in the institution in the 1960s, never charged, never confessing, taking his secrets to the grave. Was Sweeney the killer? The circumstantial evidence is overwhelming. The medical skill, the timing, the psychological profile all fit. But he is not the only candidate. Over the years, other theories have emerged. Some believe the killer was a railroad worker who traveled the lines, killing in different cities, which would explain the gaps between murders. Others suggest there was more than one killer, a copycat perhaps, or a pair working together. Some forensic historians have analyzed the cuts on the bodies and suggested that the decapitations were so uniform that they had to be the work of someone who did this professionally. Not a doctor, but a butcher of livestock. There is also the murder swamp connection. In nearby Newcastle, Pennsylvania, a series of headless bodies were found in a swampy area during the same time period. The modus operandi was strikingly similar. Did the mad butcher travel? Or did he move to Pennsylvania after the burning of Kingsbury Run? The trains connected these two locations directly, making it entirely possible for one man to haunt both cities. The legacy of the Cleveland Torso murders is a scar on the city's history. It destroyed Eliot Ness. The man who defeated Al Capone left Cleveland with his reputation in tatters, defeated by a nameless shadow. He eventually died of a heart attack at the age of 54, broke and largely forgotten, still tortured by the case he couldn't crack. The shantytowns of Kingsbury Run are gone now, replaced by highways and industrial parks, but the legend remains. We are left with 12 official victims, though the number is likely much higher. 12 human beings who were discarded like refuse, their identities stolen, their lives ended in the most horrific way imaginable. Edward Andrassy, Florence Polillo, the Tattooed Man, Rose Wallace, and the nameless Does. They are the silent witnesses to a pure evil that walked the streets of 1930s America. Modern forensic science has tried to revisit the case. DNA testing has been attempted on the few remaining samples, but the degradation over nearly a century makes it almost impossible. We may never know for sure who wielded the blade in the smoke-filled ravines of Cleveland. Was it the deranged surgeon, Dr. Sweeney? Was it the unfortunate bricklayer, Frank Dolezal? Or was it a face we have never seen, a man who lived a long, quiet life, hiding his monstrous nature behind a mask of normalcy? This case forces us to confront the uncomfortable truth that justice is not guaranteed. Sometimes the bad guy gets away. Sometimes the darkness wins. The torso killer vanished as mysteriously as he arrived, leaving behind only questions and a city haunted by headless ghosts. Thank you for joining us on this descent into the abyss here at DCF Investigations. We strive to shine a light where others fear to tread, but some shadows are too deep to clear. As you step back into the safety of your own life, I want you to consider this. If a killer like the Mad Butcher could operate with such impunity in a major city, protected by the chaos of the times and the apathy of society toward the poor, could such a monster exist today? Or do our modern surveillance and forensics make us safe? Or perhaps, are there still forgotten places and forgotten people where a predator can hunt unseen? Let us know your theory on the identity of the butcher in the comments below. Until next time, stay vigilant and remember, not every mystery has an answer.